Another issue that was talked about quite a bit is changes to regulations for tow trucks and storages. As I said in my story about the moose, in Northern Ontario, that is not a Northern Ontario issue, really. At least a country Northern Ontario issue. We're happy if we can find any kind of tow truck. I'm proud to be a CAA member, and they have given my family excellent service. I have a daughter, a very intelligent daughter, who is very good at losing keys and locking them in her car. And they have bailed me out a couple times. I give a shout out to her, shout outs due. And CAA has filled a pretty big void in our part of the world and its members. But I understand, and I look at the news too. I don't pretend to be an expert on this issue. I see what I see in the news, and obviously there are issues. There are going to be pilot projects created to see how they can control this on the major highways, and more enforcement created. That brings up an important question, though. So there's several facets to enforcement. There's giving the power to enforce and the actual act of enforcement. And I think we saw that a few weeks ago where the government tried to give police more power to enforce something, and the police, because they're on the ground, said, nah, sorry, like that's not going to fly. Okay, and that's what happened in our view. And I give the police forces full credit. They are on the ground. I'm somewhat surprised that the government didn't ask them first, but that's the way it went. But with this issue, so we are going to, the government is going to create more enforcement powers. I believe a director of towing, I got the term. But the question is, who? Who's going to do the enforcement? Because as we speak now, the government has a hard time keeping transportation enforcement officers now because they're paid less than equivalent enforcement officers in other agencies. And they do a very stressful job. Because when you're out enforcing commercial vehicles, you're out, it's not like policing playgrounds. Oh no, they quit that, right? Oh, but when it's you and a truck and you're alongside the road, I don't think it's a pretty job. And that's why, and the Auditor General in a report of 2019 identified the issue that there is already a lack of enforcement and a lack of inspections. And it's mainly because there's a lack of people. You're having a hard time recruiting people to do a tough job for less money than the same qualifications can do in other areas. So now you're going to create more enforcement, at least talk about more enforcement. We can create the legislation. You can create the legislation. But you have to deal with, are you actually going to be able to carry out the legislation? Because legislation that can't be carried out, we're kidding ourselves. We're kidding ourselves. We have to be very careful with what we enable enforcement agencies to do. It's very critical. But we also have to ensure that once we create the enforcement capabilities that those agencies are actually able to do the job they've been tasked with. And that's actually not happening now with transportation enforcement officers. Because if it was, you wouldn't be constantly trying to recruit more. So I think that's something. And I appreciate that we have the ability to talk about that today. Because what I said at the start of my remarks was that it's good that we are talking about an issue that we actually have the time in this House to bring up issues that need to be discussed, that need to be worked out on all our behalfs and on the behalf of the people who are on the roads. The bill is affectionately known by the government as the Moms Act. Well, on behalf of the moms. Because, and that goes for every minister. It's one thing to talk about here, to talk about what's right and what we say is not right, but we have to be able to make sure that what we talk about here and what the government wants to improve or we want to help with or want to stop, that actually it can translate to people on the roads. And I think that one's a very tough, a very, very tough one. It has to be, we need to discuss how that happens. Because the Auditor General had numbers on how many trucks were pulled off the road, and that then the number of enforcement officers and the number of inspections was reduced, and so were the number of trucks were pulled off the road were reduced. And it's not my business. I'm not trying to pull truckers off the road. We want all trucks to be safe, both for the trucker and for the people who are sharing the road with the trucker. And you know what? The vast majority of the truckers want to be safe. I think all truckers want to be safe. And that brings me